Kyle,
I'm Andre.
and we're going to be talking about cloud computing and specifically Amazon Web Services today. Now, we have had a little technical glitch, and so if the stream cuts out, I apologize. We may come back, or if we're near the end of the conversation or it just doesn't work out, then we'll just have to catch you next week. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. And of course, it is saved online for viewing in both those locations. All right. So we like to start out with a little bit of news, and this news will be on topic. And so let me share the screen here. And it is all about AWS. And that is that signups for AWS reInvent have started. It is in Las Vegas from November 28th to December. Let's go back. December 2nd. And it is basically a user conference. So registration is now open for AWS reInvent happening in about 4 weeks. All right. So, Andre, Amazon Web Services. You mind summarizing that for me in a nutshell? What is AWS?
So AWS is a back-end cloud service that allows people to create websites, host content through the internet, and it's probably the most popular form of hosting service that's out there right now. I believe it's about like 60% of the internet is hosted on AWS.
Yeah.
AWS, excuse me about that. And it is constantly growing. It is a very popular service out there that people can use, and we use it ourselves on a variety of different things. We have our own self-hosted servers, our own self-hosted databases, and we have storage services that we work on, and we have our own, as well as a plethora of other things that we've been working on.
All right. Yeah. So there's a lot out there. So it's a cloud computing platform, right? Some other big ones are Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure.
Mhm.
There's a whole host of smaller companies out there that each have pros and cons to them. Want to make sure that everybody knows we're not endorsed by Amazon or anything. That's just the hosting provider that we prefer in house. We are Microsoft partners and have used Azure stuff.
Right.
I myself, big Google fan, used several Google Cloud technologies, especially for the voice to text translation.
Oh, for sure. Same myself, actually.
Yeah. So it's not about any official relationship other than we're customers of AWS, so we're going to be referencing them a lot. But we want to talk about general cloud computing.
Yes.
So. I think one of the funniest things I heard about cloud computing once is I was inside of a Verizon store, and somebody was like, "Oh, and you can get the Verizon Cloud on this phone." And the lady that the salesperson was speaking to said, "Oh, I don't need the cloud on my phone. I have the cloud on my computer at home."
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yes. So it belied a fundamental misunderstanding of what the cloud is. Mm-hmm. So let's back up for a second. What is the cloud? Any comments?
Yes. So, I mean, do you want me to answer the question?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So the cloud essentially is also a network of computers and servers that all work together to host content as well. Also web pages, but a lot of this can be things like storage as well as computing itself, like processors and that sort of thing. So, like I've heard, as an example of like one cloud computing's use case is that like there's a lot of projects out there that I saw where people can actually use their own phones and computers to actually contribute to a project that will usually use like a supercomputer. So everyone's processors or everyone's specs could be used as a large computing organism to help do things like research Alzheimer's disease or recently COVID-19 or several other things I've seen online.
Yeah, so that takes me back to like the early days of Linux networking that I was into with parallel processing and specific Linux distros that were focused on PPC, parallel processing computers. So there's that. So we've got that. So basically, the cloud is someone else's computer, right?
Pretty much.
There's more than one cloud.
Yes.
Just like the real sky, there's more than one cloud.
Yes. Yes. Always.
And you can build private clouds, right? There's
Mhm.
private cloud infrastructures that you can get out there, and you can set up your own.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's really just the next iteration of client server architecture is how I look at it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, and so you touched on a lot of things. There's storage, which could be files, could be databases, could be websites.
Mhm.
There's processing, actually, going through it and doing compute and using memory resources and things like that. So there's a lot
Right.
of functions to it.
Mhm.
Let's explore some of those specifics by getting into some specific AWS services. We'll use that as a launching point.
Sure. Let's
Sound
go
good?
ahead.
All right. So I'm just going to go to the AWS product page, and let's start with EC2, right?
Mhm.
Virtual servers in the cloud. We have any EC2 instances?
We do actually. We have,
Yeah.
I believe, 5. Four of which are currently running. One of which is a service that we're working on to try and get up and running.
Yeah. So development
now.
environment. Yeah, and
Mhm.
so that's one of the cool things with the cloud is that these resources don't have to be permanent,
No,
right? You can turn them on, you can turn them off, use them as needed.
you can resize them if you want to.
That's a great function. So virtual servers in the cloud. So, when you're small, you might need, something real small for a testing environment where you might need a lot of storage space. So you want a 1 terabyte hard drive, but you just need like a quad core processor and 8 gigs of RAM while you're getting stuff set up. And
Okay.
then you might want to grow that to 16 processors and 80 gigs of RAM. And using virtual servers, you can scale that a whole lot easier than hardware.
Mhm. Right.
And you've been through some of that resizing. Are there any particular considerations that you can think of when having to scale up that people might want to think about before they make that change?
The biggest reason I can think of is just like a scaled workflow. So like you might start with something like a simple gateway or something like that in order to get just a basic end-to-end communication going on. But then maybe you might decide, oh, you know what? I actually want to run like a database on this server,
Mhm.
or I actually want this thing to do a little bit more communications with more devices. So let's go in there and let's change the size of the instance to be from anything like 2 processor cores and 2 gigs of RAM to something
Mhm.
like 4 processor cores and 16 gigs of RAM just to start,
Yeah,
and then you keep going from there.
very cool. So with EC2, you're setting up a whole server, whether it's a Windows server or Linux server or whatever. You've got a whole server.
Yeah, you can have a macro server if you wanted to.
You can. So some specific functions though are just cloud storage of files and database services. So let's talk a little bit about Amazon S3 or Amazon Simple Storage Service. So EC2 is the Elastic Cloud Compute. S3 is Simple Storage Service, and that's just for file storage, right?
Pretty much. Yes.
And let's talk a little bit about cost. What do people have to think about cost wise with S3 in specific?
So there's different types of storage out there that you can really look at and you have to consider. Do you want storage that can be readily accessible for a given workflow that you're currently working on, or do you just need something like archival storage?
Right, because they have their Glacier type
Yes,
storage
exactly.
for maybe long-term backup cold storage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cold
All right.
storage, exactly.
All right, keep going. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah. So basically, as you use like these more higher end storage, if you're using like say like their normal storage options, you would have to look at like high cost for your storage as well as high cost for accessing that storage in general.
Okay, so there's a cost for how much stuff you put there, and a cost for how much you're using that stuff, how
Right.
often.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. All right.
And especially as you're using this storage for workflow that you're currently using like at this moment, but you could also not have to do that if you're looking at archival storage like the Glacier Deep Archive storage.
Mhm.
That you can see like much lower cost for storage in general, and then a lower cost for having to access that storage. But you also have to consider time when you're looking at these options. So like if you're using like the Deep Glacier storage, for example, you might have to look at like 12 hours of accessing up to that.
Okay.
So it's really good for archive storage. in that case.
Okay. So we've got that, and then all those are stored on elastic block stores or EBS volumes, right?
Yes.
And that's basically just their fake hard drive. I mean, how do you
Yeah.
like? So do they have a physical hard drive? Like, if you're like, hey, I need 200 gigs of space, do they go get a 200 gig hard drive and plug that in, or what do they do? What are they doing?
So it's just already configured hardware that's on the that's set at the data center, but it's just partitioned in such a way that it can be at service to the customers who are paying for it, who need that specific amount of storage.
All right, so they're virtual drives that can grow and shrink. And actually, I don't think AWS will let you shrink a drive. I think you have to create a new drive.
Yeah, I
If you
believe
wanna shrink.
so as well.
Yeah. Well, you can expand that drive because it's virtual,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so part of what helps keep these costs low is that they're shared resources.
hmm
You know, when you set up an Amazon server or an Amazon hard drive or whatever it is, you're not the only person using that machine, right?
No.
They've got some pretty beefy servers that might have hundreds of cores of processing power available to them
Definitely.
that they're divvying out to people.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Let's see. So, talked a little bit about. One of the big reasons that people might use the online file storage is for backup.
Yeah, we were just talking a little bit
Right.
about that.
Yeah. So they've got the backup solutions, but they also have the Elastic File System or EFS,
Mhm.
which basically works like a virtual NAS. Basically, it's just a cache sitting out on, and FSX works the same way. Well, similar, but basically it's just a looks like a network drive, and it's out there, has a URL to it, an IP address to it actually, and you can connect to it and use that from anywhere. So that can be great for remote remote storage, quick access stuff. That's one of the high availability, high cost ones,
Yeah.
right, for EFS versus the backup is more of a low cost solution. I think, and there's different storage solutions are priced different ways. One thing that I found interesting is that some of them don't charge you to put data onto it.
Yeah, they
Oh,
do
yeah.
exist.
Only to get data off.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, hey, you can put as much as you want here, keep loading it up, and they'll charge you for the storage space,
Mhm.
but they don't charge you any of the in outs for putting it on there. But when you want to retrieve it, they're like, now we're going to charge you.
Yeah.
And not that it's them trying to trick anybody, but it's just a change in thinking.
Mhm.
You mentioned databases.
I did. Yes.
Yeah. So what's the main service that we use for databases?
That'll be what you're looking at right now, Amazon RDS.
Okay. Good deal. Yeah, and I don't think anyone else. Yeah, they're not seeing our screen here.
Oh.
It's all good. It's all good. It's just us.
Yeah.
So let me go back to where that was. D is for database.
Yes.
There we go. All right. So we've got Amazon RDS. What is RDS in a nutshell?
So RDS related database service is a service that allows you to create a database and allows you to use that in a workflow that can allow you to do things like, let's say, you're creating an application where you need people to review data
Mhm.
that you have uploaded from an extraction. So what you could do is you could create you could create a certain amount of data that you can then upload to a database.
Mhm.
And then using a different service altogether, a data reviewer service, they could access that same database, pull the data in there, and be able to review the data that you just created.
Yeah, very cool. So it's like having SQL. And so like RDS works with MySQL or MySQL, Postgres or PostgreSQL, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and MariaDB. Those are the established platforms or support platforms for Amazon RDS. And for example, like with SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, you set up a SQL Server instance, and then you get connection parameters,
Mhm.
and anyone with a application that connects to SQL Server or SQL Server Management Studio or whatever they're using can connect to that instance and use it just like they would any other SQL instance. They see to the end user, it's no different than having a local instance, right?
Yeah, no, it's the exact same way, really.
Yeah, and do you allocate resources to this RDS also, like you would a server?
Yes, you do. You also have to consider things like processor size and type when you're creating your RDS server. Memory is also a big consideration. Storage is still a big consideration here, although I don't think as big since you're not like running an operating system, necessarily speaking.
These databases generally have smaller footprints than full servers,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Which can be a cost-saving measure. If you're like, hey, I just need some database access in the cloud, you don't need to set up a whole server, a license, Windows, all this stuff.
Yeah.
You can set up an RDS instance.
Exactly.
Save a few bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, they also have their own database system called Amazon Aurora, which is MySQL and Postgres compatible. So you've got those. And then you have DynamoDB, which is their NoSQL or NoSQL platform. So a couple different, and then there's other ones like Neptune, which is a graphing database. There's graph database. There's all sorts of different ones out there, but there's a lot of options. I guess what I'm saying,
Yes.
and it can be confusing or overwhelming.
For sure.
One thing that I've found personally is that Amazon has a great team, and when you don't know which services you're going to need, sign up for an account with them under AWS. And either they'll reach out to you or you reach out to your account manager and just talk with them. They're real understanding, at least in my experience.
Oh, yeah. I would concur with that.
Yeah. So they've helped us out. They've directed us. They don't provide, they're not there to do the work for you, but they will give you links to the instructions on what to do.
Yeah.
They will pair you with an expert on the Amazon team who's like, okay, what are your needs? Okay, you know what? You probably need a server or you probably don't need a server. What kind of database do you want to use? Well, you don't know. Well, what applications are you going to be using this for? And maybe they can help direct you. So there's a limit to what they will do.
For sure. Yeah.
But as helpful as they can be, they will be. Like I said, short of doing your job for you.
Yeah.
One thing that we should probably talk about a little bit is security. When it comes to Amazon putting stuff in the cloud, that's the biggest thing that people seem to have trouble with putting things in the cloud, is that they can't touch it, they can't hold it. It doesn't feel like everyone else is like, oh, well, here's my data, right? And they want to be able to hold it, which is a little bit of an illusion with computer security in the first place.
Yeah.
But in the cloud, they're worried that, hey, it's not in my house anymore. How do I protect it? Does Amazon have any tools for that?
Yes, they have plenty of networking tools that are available to you here. We're just looking at a few of these. We have, like, let's say, Route 53. We have Amazon VPC. We have a few others here.
Yeah.
Amazon WAN, Cloud WAN.
Yeah. So there's a lot of options, right? They've even got a VPN, virtual private network, that you can use. So VPC, though, that's kind of the basic one, right? And we start there.
Yes.
And it works kind of like a firewall where, it works like a firewall where it says, hey, you can access these resources from these specific IP addresses. Maybe you lock it down by an IP address. Yeah. Of course, if you're hosting a website, you want all the IP addresses to access it, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's just access on these ports, right? Maybe it's just, hey, port 80 for internet, but not for remote desktop if you're on Windows, or not my MySQL port if you're using a Linux instance with running MySQL. So you can lock things down by port. You can lock things down by IP address. It's not as detailed as a full firewall system like a Barracuda system.
Right.
Barracuda actually sells an Amazon instance for securing your Amazon resources. So if you want those abilities, you can. So there's there's partners to Amazon that have created tools that work in the cloud.
Yes.
And then you mentioned Route 53. That's for DNS, routing everything around, making sure everything gets to the right place,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then VPN. So VPN, we were talking a little bit about firewall. How might a VPN help people that are working with the cloud?
So let's start with VPN. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. So it is a network of computers and servers that can connect to each other, and it's all contained within its own virtual network, essentially. It can be over the internet. So of course, you could be anywhere. You could be here in the Houston area, or you could be in Chicago. Someone could be in London, and they could all still connect to each other and share resources amongst each other, because it's still a network that's connected amongst each other and can still share resources that way.
So the VPN defines like these cloud resources work together and they're separate from the other cloud resources.
Exactly. Yes.
Kind of walling things off that way.
Yes.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, all right. Well, let's talk about some a little bit more fun stuff around the edge stuff here, with some of the machine learning tools that AWS has. Big one is SageMaker. Right, you can build, train, and deploy machine learning models at scale. I just read the tagline. Yeah. I didn't come with that myself. Yeah. But they've got a lot of cool things in here. They've got some stuff that is specific to industries, like HealthLake. So if you've got different industries that you're working with, they might have some specific tools for you. I know that Amazon has specific instances that are SOC2 compliant, FedRAMP compliant, HIPAA compliant, and of course you have to have rules and procedures around that to really maintain that compliance. But technology is a part of that compliance, and they have things there. Let's see. They've got some other cool tools though. Any that you might be able to name?
Yes, there's one I really like, Amazon Textract.
Okay.
This one allows you to extract text and data from documents.
I think one of the coolest things I saw about Amazon Textract is its native table recognition.
Yes, that's really nice.
Yeah, so it does a good job of recognizing tables during the OCR process. Not that other people don't, just saying that it does a good job, and it's really cool.
No, we work with some great OCR solutions right here.
Yeah,
when it comes to table extraction as well.
And we mentioned we've both used Google Speech to Text, right?
Yes.
With Google Cloud. Amazon, of course, has a competing product. So you'll find that a lot of these cloud resources have a lot of the same offerings. And it might just be a matter of cost. It might be a matter of ease of use. Might be just a matter of preference of how you interact with them, which I guess falls into the ease of use. Yeah. But there's different considerations to take into place when choosing some of these. So there's a lot of other stuff. They have business applications for sending out emails. They've got blockchain applications or functions if you want to work with blockchain stuff. Cloud computing, which really falls in, like we were talking about with the EC2. But they also have Lambda. What does Lambda let you do?
So Lambda allows you to run code without thinking about servers at all.
Okay. So basically you can have resources that you can execute. Maybe you have a mobile application and you want to run it like in a serverless environment, and it just needs to process some stuff and return the results back. So yeah, you can execute code in that manner. So there's a lot of different options. I think we would just be listing names of services at this point if we were to keep going. Yeah. So what are some instances, let's just talk in general, what are some reasons why somebody might move to the cloud?
So, you don't have to maintain your own servers, for one thing. You don't have to maintain your own hard drives or your own storage solutions. You don't have to maintain your own environments, aside from general going in there and making sure that everything's configured properly and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you don't have to create it for one thing, build it from scratch or something like that. There's many reasons why you would want to use.
That last one though, that reminds me, one of the Amazon services in particular that we didn't talk about, and I know Azure has a really good system that's very similar. Um, Amazon Workspaces,
Yes.
yeah, for
Workspaces,
virtual
for sure.
computers.
Mhm.
So there, especially during the pandemic, right? People were having to scale up remote workers very quickly,
Yeah.
and that's really what the cloud lets you do is scale up and scale down quickly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Buying your own computer over time will be cheaper than the cloud.
Definitely.
Buying a server over time, it will be cheaper to have your own hardware. But if you need to make changes to that hardware, now you have to go buy new hardware. And that's where the cloud with scalability really comes into play. So Amazon Workspaces, those are just virtual desktops. And
Yeah.
so, I don't know. Have you bought a desktop recently? How much does a desktop cost?
It can really depend on the desktop itself.
Yeah.
So like if you want to buy, like, let's say a high-end desktop, which I've done for like gaming and that sort of thing, it could be like over $1,000
Okay.
easily.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I generally think of like kind of mid-level computers for either if you're working from home, or again something just for like the normal office employee, somewhere around $500 or $600 is what I like to think of.
Mhm.
You can usually you can get some mini PCs like this, right?
Yep.
They're not very strong. And you can get refurbished computers. You can spend $200 or $300 on a computer, right?
Mhm.
You can do that. Get some
Yep.
something like that may be lower end.
Go to Best Buy, find like a small tower or something like that, for like $100 or something. Like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, you can. You can get kind of the budget computers from off the shelf at Best Buy or Walmart or
Yep.
Office Depot. Again, not endorsing anybody, just trying to list them off. For less than $400.
Yep.
But you could spin up a virtual workstation with workspaces where you're paying 25-30 bucks a month for it.
Yeah.
You can even get the Microsoft Office license and security package on top of that. And now you might be spending $50 a month, and you're like, oh, $50 a month. Well, over the course of a year, that's $600.
Mhm.
That's how much it would cost me to go buy my own computer. So that's what I'm saying. Over time, it's cheaper to own your own stuff. But what if you're not using that workstation all the time?
Yeah, it could be configuring your machine to be like, I want 8 cores of CPU or 8 CPU cores. I want 32 gigs of RAM, and I want a terabyte of storage. And you'd be like, I actually don't need that much. As you start using that, you could be like, okay, I'm just going to up and down to 4 cores.
Yeah, you can bump it down, you can bump it up, or like if in a business sense, if you're working with contractors and you want a secure network, right? Instead of maybe you have a short-term project that you need to really staff up for. Do you want to go buy 10 computers and spend $6,000 on that, and then in a year you've got 10 computers around and nobody to use them because of a short-term project, or and you don't want them to bring their own computers for security purposes, right? You might not want to, or they're working there. Yeah, and if they're working remote, you have absolutely zero oversight.
Yeah.
So maybe you set up some workspaces inside of a VPC inside of Amazon, and you're paying $50 a month, but it's just a 90-day project.
Yeah.
And when they're done, you just turn the machines off or delete them even, and you don't even have to pay for that cold storage.
Yep.
And then your costs stop.
Yeah. Just stuff like that.
So I think the workspaces, you can get pretty intense with them. I think they go all the way up to like 32 cores, like some pretty intense stuff where you're spending a couple $100 a month on it.
Like pro workstation levels. Something like that.
Yeah. Like if you were doing like some video rendering and something like that.
Yeah.
You might spin up something like that. So it could be fun.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So there's that. I think the biggest reason that people switch to the cloud is just high availability.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That became a big deal, of course, in 2020 when people weren't at the office and they needed access to files. And so while it may be an extra expense or it may be some extra work to transition to the cloud, you just got to do it in some cases to make sure that everybody has access to things. And that way you're not having to email things around or like, hey, which Dropbox has the real version in it? If you can move these resources to the cloud and keep your authoritative version and keep your file structure in place and everything, it can really help the team work a lot better.
For sure.
And that's definitely worth the expense. I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about the cost of a project, they're looking at, okay, well, to do this is going to cost this much money. They're not thinking about the fact that when they're not doing that, all the time that's wasted is actually costing them lots of money, because that's the biggest expense most companies have is people.
Yeah.
And so if those people are wasting time because they don't have access to resources, then they're wasting money too.
Mm-hmm.
Not that time is money, but time is money is a phrase for a reason,
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Yes,
cool.
all the time.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking with us today about cloud computing, AWS in specific, Andre. Any last comments you want to make before we sign off?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Honestly.
That's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm Kyle.
I'm Andre.
And this has been Man vs. Tech. We appreciate you watching. Thanks everyone who joined us live, and enjoy the rewatches. If you watch it, it'll be online on LinkedIn and YouTube and elsewhere.